That is, yeah. Okay, I think this is the time that we can start our today's seminar. And hello, everybody, and welcome to the 9 English Fast Track Seminar. I'm Untitled Chapter, Assistant Professor at National HSE University, Higher School of Economics and Institute of Education. Today we have a new seminar and new speaker with a new topic. So let me introduce you briefly our today's speaker, who is Daniel Cavanagh from Melbourne University. And Daniel first studied at HSE University, as a master's student in psychology, and then graduated from this university and moved to Australia. And now he's a Ph.D. fellow at the Melbourne University School of Population and Global Health Center for Mental Health. Thank you, Daniel, for accepting our invitation. We are happy to have you today. And now you can say a few words about yourself, your research interests, and perhaps your topic. And then you can, after, begin your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Morteza. Good morning, everyone. I'm in Bermuda, so I'm about 6 hours earlier than all of you. So I had a nice early morning to start today. Just a little bit about myself first. I, as Morteza said, studied at HSE. I did the Masters of Applied Social Psychology, and there I was in very good hands. It was a wonderful course at a wonderful institution. So I'm very jealous of those of you who are studying there at the moment. I had a wonderful time, and it was only because of studying at HSE that I was able to get into such a good program at the University of Melbourne at the Centre for Mental Health here. So absolutely, you're on the right track, and I hope you're enjoying your studies. A little bit about my research. Whilst I was at the High School of Economics in the Masters of Applied Social Psychology program, I worked with Thomas Yosik, who I believe is still around. He basically got me onto the topic of something called mental health literacy. Mental health literacy is essentially the knowledge and beliefs that people have about mental disorders and how they're recognized, treated, and prevented. The idea is that the higher mental health literacy that you have, the more likely you are to deal better with that problem. Just like with a health problem, if you have a broken arm, you know that you're not meant to use it. And the more knowledge you have about that problem, the quicker that you will heal and the better that you will heal. So the same idea is applied to mental health, with the idea that if you know more about your mental health problems, then you'll deal better with that problem. You'll be able to seek treatment quicker, and that treatment will be more effective. So I became fascinated with this, and I started to focus on the mental health literacy of young Russians and young Australians. Whilst that will be the focus of my talk today, I was then able to take all the knowledge and the information research that I found at the High School of Economics and published, and then moved to Bermuda. And now my PhD topic is on mental health literacy, but on young Bermudians specifically. And I'm not doing any sort of cross-cultural study there. So I'd like to get straight into my the paper that I was fortunate enough not too long ago to be able to publish in the International Journal of Social Psychiatry. You'll notice a familiar name on this, in that Morteza did play a valuable role in all the statistics and making sure that it was done correctly. And also Thomas Yosik, who I mentioned. So I published this a few months ago. Morteza, you're going to need to let me share the screen. It's currently disabled.
Yes, Julia, please activate the share screen option for, thank you.
Okay, yes, try to share the screen now.
Yeah, perfect, thank you. Okay, so this is the journal here. I understand that you've done a few of these sessions, or I believe these sessions have been going on, so this won't be the first time that you've seen an article, or maybe some of you are already published. So I'll try and just speak to what was important lessons for me and some of the things that I wanted to highlight. First off, all the things that I've written in yellow when it comes to this paper are the things that were of particular importance, and the things that I felt really needed to be spoken to all the way throughout. So with any title, you've always got to make sure the most important key terms are in there so that people know that what you're talking about. And it was actually upon Morteza's suggestion that I framed this as a question, so people could see just by reading the question, what is likely the answer going to be, just having read the question? What could I hypothesize would actually be the answers that would come about from a study like this? So most of this, I'm sure you've probably already read, especially if you're doing PhD programs, you've probably read hundreds of articles. So I won't go too far into explaining the things like the abstract, but I want to talk about specifically my what I was looking at, which was trust, help seeking, depression in Russia and Australia. So essentially, I was looking at, do levels of trust influence how we endorse help seeking? So psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors, specifically for depression in both Russia and Australia. The first thing I want to highlight is that when it comes to writing and trying to publish, I think overall, if I'm going to be honest, the statistics that I put into this, there could have been more, and I have seen other articles published in this journal with more advanced techniques and other things that were explored, and I'll show you this in the method section in a little bit. However, the thing that was most strongly supported when the reviewer came back and gave comments on the article is he said that this was much needed research because it was so novel, that Russia is such an under-researched population that it's worthy of being published, because information about Russians and Russian speakers is really needed. So the information that I've got highlighted here in yellow really speaks to the why. Why was this research done? And that's what I think, that's probably my biggest reason, especially if you don't feel as confident on other areas of your research. If you don't feel as confident about all types of your writing, make sure you have a very powerful why. Make sure it's really clear that this is a big problem and the research into this area is needed. And again, I think there were lots of things in hindsight. I look at this article now and I think, oh God, I would like to change that. But again, because it was so novel and research on Russians and cross-cultural comparisons is so rare, it was accepted. And I think it was easier to be accepted because of that, to be published. So basic things. As you can see, depression is a major issue worldwide. It's also a problem in Russia. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't seek help for mental health problems. It's something that we know across mental disorders. There are high levels of stigma. There are a whole range of reasons why people don't seek help, but the reality is that people don't seek help. The first thing I want to bring your attention to, though, is something that was a constant challenge. So the things that are in purple, such as here, was a constant challenge. And this is something that even until it was published, I still felt like this would be the reason that it won't get published, because there was conflict about this. And what I mean by conflict is that I had a different idea to my supervisor, who had a different idea to their publisher. And so we all were coming at this from different angles. And ultimately it was the reviewer who was going to decide whether or not this was worthy of being published. So what you'll notice here is it says young individuals. And if you go back to my title, it doesn't say anything about young individuals. Initially, my title was, how does trust affect help seeking for depression in young Russians and Australians? And my focus was on youth, but a very broad definition of youth. So anyone from 16 until 30. You'll see why in a little bit later, why that was not accepted, and why I had to take out of the title the name youth or young, but it was still kept in the rest of the paper. So the blue is referred to, just refers to the definitions. That was one thing that I'm surprised that I had to remind myself to put in there. Make sure you have, for the key terms, you've got the most important definitions, and you've got, typically you've got them from reliable sources or sources that are what you're going to use in your instruments or for what you measure. So if you're using a validated instrument and they've got a definition of trust, then use that definition of trust as well. So again, there is just some definitions in here. So basically, I predicted that trust would influence help-seeking behavior because there was some literature to support that. And I also predicted that Russians would have a lack of trust in mental health professionals because of, during the Soviet system, mental health professionals or psychologists and psychiatrists were used as instruments of the state to basically put down political dissidents. So if you disagreed with the state or Soviet policies, you would be deemed as crazy and you would be sent off to an asylum and never heard from again. So this created this great distrust between systems, particularly health systems or mental health systems, and the Russian public. So I predicted that Russians would have less trust. Australians is a high trust society, so they would have higher trust. And then also Russians would have high levels of stigma as well, stigma and social distancing. So moving through, again, you can see the areas in yellow. These are the things that I speak to that I think are of importance or that were novel. So basically that Russian participants would have greater stigma, that Russian participants would have greater social distancing, which is social distancing is where if you have a mental health problem, others will try and stay away from you because they don't want to get the problem themselves, or they think it could be some sort of contagion effect. So they avoid you. So I predicted that would be higher in Russians than Australians, that they would have lower levels of trust, and that they would endorse help seeking, all forms of help seeking less. So these were novel findings, and that's why the majority of my research was it was easier for it to be published because it was novel information. The high levels of trust, again, there was some established evidence. The extant literature suggested that this would be a case. However, this linked in specifically with endorsement of help seeking, which is where mine was slightly different. What I've put in green here is structure. So one thing you may already know in which case I'll just be telling you to do something, how to do it already. But I didn't realize at the start, your hypotheses always have to be general first and then specific. So if you're having 5 hypotheses and you will collapse both samples or all samples, then the general hypotheses have to be first, and then any specific differences between the groups come there afterwards. And I thank you, Morteza, for that one. Yeah, so there's finally in here, Australia, depression also has a major role to play in the burden of disease, or it's a major problem. And that's why in both places it was important to study. So coming to this purple patch here, I said before that I would come back to why this was a problem with the young participants. So the mean age of my participants was 26, with a standard deviation of just under 10 years. And many health organizations use an age range of 15 to 29, 15 to 30 for their identification of youth. A previous study had focused on Russians and Americans, and it was an older sample. So I wanted to focus more on young people. I'm a teacher, so that was who I felt more comfortable with. And basically what we found is that with the participants that we had, most of them were below the age of 30. And so we wanted to run the tests on them, and we found that all the tests had the same level of significance. But because we didn't want to lose power, we wanted to include all participants. But then as soon as we included all participants, the reviewer then said, look, if 20% of your sample is now above this critical age of 30, then you can't say that this is a youth sample. So that was a challenge, and we had to review there. Another thing that the reviewer commented on was about, I had to do a convenience sample. So I basically had to get friends to help me send this out to lots of people from everywhere, from Russia to Kazakhstan to, there were participants all over the place that were Russian speaking. And then I had to get also friends back in Australia to do the study as well. And that actually took quite a long time, longer than I thought it would. So yeah, moving through, I'll just go straight to the results now. So basically what we found is that all of the hypotheses were supported. Russians had lower levels of trust, and trust did predict help seeking in endorsement of professionals such as psychologists, doctors. Moving through, Russians were less likely to seek help across the board from all types of people, from GPs, of family doctors, psychologists, teachers, spiritual leaders, Interestingly, one where there was less, where there was the same amount of help seeking was in close family members and friends. And there's some support there in the literature in the sense that Russians will trust within the family unit, but or within a very close unit, but not trust strangers. And again, Russians did have high levels of stigma across the several different items, so they were more likely to believe it was not a real medical illness. They could snap out of it. It was due to a personal weakness, or Australians were more likely to believe it was a chemical imbalance in the brain. And there actually wasn't a difference in unpredictability. The one where it also wasn't significant was in terms of it being an immoral lifestyle. That item of stigma had been found between Russians and Americans. But again, I had a younger sample, and whereas before depression may have been seen as a something that had been caused by immoral actions, something that is religious or faith-based, that seems to be diluted at this point in time, or in the younger generation, it seems to be being less. And then again, Russians were more likely to have social distance. So that's basically all the key points. There were some other things that the reviewer said, whereby they said that at one point it seemed like we were being quite critical of the Russian healthcare system. We did have quite a lot of reviewer comments, and we had to justify this, the idea that that there are many Russian professionals and mental health professionals that want to be using evidence-based practice, but that they don't have the funding to do so, or that currently there's still a lot of distrust in the Russian healthcare system by the public. And then finally, just the conclusion of results. Once you've actually made your conclusions, what can we do with this information? I think you should always have something that you can do with information. And yeah, I think those are the key things. I realize that I've spoken over time, so I apologize, Morteza, for that. But I've already spoken to all of these key things in here. So if there's any questions, or you have to run off, that's also fine. But thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, for the nice presentation. Actually, it was nice because of several reasons, but I just point out one of them, which was lack of evidence and resources about young mental health. Mental health about at the age of young people. So this is actually one of the problem that you cover it very well by your study, and that was one of the things, I think, novelty of your study that helped to get your paper accepted in a very well-known journal. So now actually let me say that we have a few minutes for question and answer. So anyone, if he has a question, about what Daniel presented, can turn on the camera and ask directly the question, or if it's difficult for you, you can just pass it to me, then I can ask the question on your behalf, or you can use the chat and then I can read it from the chat side. Thank you. So we'll wait for question.
Can I just jump in?
Yeah, please go on. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Well, first, thank you very much, Daniel, for your presentation. It's really a nice job, and it's good that you published in a pretty well reputable journal. So could you please go back to the definition of trust? Because I guess it's quite important, you see, and it will probably help us to understand, the results of your study better. Because you see, we're not quite sure whether you use more, you see, pro, Western definition or something like that. Because I guess now it's quite difficult to understand the results without understanding the definition.
Sure. So I used the definition of trust used by Coleman from the 1990s. A lot of studies have used this definition of trust since that time. And so the most important thing for me, I think, is to use validated instruments. I'm sure if you're a PhD student or even a master's student, you've been taught to this already, but you need to make, I basically wanted to make sure that I had used validated instruments so that when I got to my method section, I could justify the choice of my instruments. So I use this definition of trust here, where you provide something of value to the other person, this includes the disclosure of sensitive information to someone else where you can't do anything about what they do with that information. So that there is trust in the sense of mental health, because you will share something possibly about your mental health problem, about your symptoms, and the other person can choose to do what they want with that information. So this has been used in a number of studies, and if it's helpful, I can share with you those studies that have used this instrument of trust. But this instrument of trust hadn't been used specifically to look at how does this type of trust then impact upon the endorsement of help seeking. So how effective a psychologist is going to be in dealing with help. I'm not sure I answered your question, but if you wanted to reframe it.
No, you did. Thanks. Because because you see, I had a question just mostly around the tool you used, and you just told me that it's mostly around, you see, disclosing information. Yeah, now it makes sense. Yeah, thanks.
That's okay. I think there's also I didn't have enough time about this measurement of trust here, but it was used by Nathan Shape in 2009 as part of a wider German study there. So that's how I knew that it was validated. And you'll also be able to always find those scores like the Cronbach alphas and all the reliability scores to make sure you've got that.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually interesting question Alexander just asked you, because a part of that also is related to methodological issue and conceptual issue. For example, when we want to use subjective variable like what you use as a trust, so we have to make sure that this construct can be transported from one culture and one country to another one. Yeah, so this is one conceptual transportation, or we call it something like this. But there is also some, I mean, the statistician nowadays, they are developing some ways, some method that we can also test for that. I mean, not only check whether conceptually can be understood in a new culture, but also there are some statistical way that we can use it. For example, I think I mentioned that before, like a measurement invariance analysis. So this is one example of this method that you can use, for example, for your future works. Okay, so any more question? Well, I mean, let me ask maybe not a question, but well, I have a comment. So Daniel, I mean, I would like to know, I mean, or let's say discuss your finding, not in terms of practical implication, but in terms of research implication. So we have some colleagues here from psychology, and I see from education field. So do you think if someone is interested in this research line and would like to, for example, work or continue this research, what should the person take into consideration for further development or research in this area? In terms of like choosing new variable or using new methodology, could you please just a little bit talk about this? Thanks.
Sure. So I guess I'll start by saying that in September 2015, the UN Secretary General, in their report on women, children, and adolescents, said that adolescents need to be prioritized as a health concern worldwide. So I focus on how does trust affect help seeking for depression in Russia and Australia. I had an inferred focus on youth, as you can see throughout my report. But the thing that I really missed were adolescents. And I think if you're working in educational psychology and you want to bring something truly novel, to be able to either repeat this research or to completely do a full mental health literacy survey on adolescent Russians would be a huge boon to Russian health and healthcare professionals. So there are a lot of incredible psychologists in Russia who would love to have this type of information, but don't. They don't know when an adolescent has a mental health problem, where are they going? Are they speaking to their friends? Are they going to psychologists? Are they going to traditional healers like tarot card readers? We don't know where they're going. We don't know how much stigma they have as young people. So that stigma that I found, is that the same in adolescence or is it different? They don't know the first aid. So if your friend has depression, what do? Do you tell them to go exercise? Do you tell them to get over it? Do you tell them the suffering will make them stronger? So actually depression is a good thing. We don't know this. So I think I would be focusing on mental health literacy, all the knowledge and beliefs that young people have about disorders, and if possible, focusing specifically on adolescents. And ideally, of course, one day it would be fantastic to have a nationally representative sample. of Russians, but even having differences between Moscow, St. Petersburg, Moscow, Kazan, Moscow, Vladikavkaz, anything, you know, having some differences. So you don't just have Russians, but you have a broader understanding of Russian speakers.
Thank you for the answer, Daniel. I mean, we wait like for 15 minutes, excuse me, 15 seconds, maybe it's less. And then if there will be no further question, then we close the seminar. Thank you.